All right, welcome everyone. My name is Kylie Goslin. I'm the Executive Director of the Partnership for Strong Communities. Thanks for joining us today. We're really excited to be hosting an IForum again. It's been a while, and although we aren't able to do this in our home at the Lyceum over on Lawrence Street in Hartford, we're glad to be joining you all virtually as we're all more than used to this format by now. We'll get into some housekeeping in a moment. I just wanted to do a brief introduction. I did want to note from the start, however, that this session is being recorded, just so that you know that. So the topic we're talking about here today, the intersections of homelessness and voting, couldn't be more relevant or timely. With threats of voter intimidation on becoming a near daily occurrence, and with new voting options and confusion and misinformation abounding, this session couldn't be more timely and the stakes couldn't be more high. But they are most highest for those who are regularly at risk of voter disenfranchisement. So communities of color, people with language barriers, and of course, folks experiencing homelessness we're here to talk about today. So we have some great speakers lined up for you today. Both some national as well as local folks. We'll be sharing information as well as practical advice for voters and as well for providers who are helping those experiencing homelessness through this process. As always, I want to thank our IForum sponsors for the year. First and always, Melville Charitable Trust, Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, the Connecticut Department of Housing, Liberty Bank, and the Connecticut Health Foundation. So with that, I will turn it over to Partnership for Strong Communities Intrepid Policy Analyst, Ms. Danielle Hubley, to kick us off.
Awesome, thank you, Kylie. Hi, everyone. I am Danielle Hubley. As Kylie mentioned, I'm the Policy Analyst with the Partnership for Strong Communities. Just a quick thank you so much for joining us today. As Kylie mentioned, this is an important and time-sensitive topic. And it's really important to think about how our work to make homelessness a rare, brief, and one-time experience intersects with our responsibility as American citizens to vote. So just some quick housekeeping. The event, as Kylie mentioned, is being recorded, and we will work to make the slides and recording available on our website in the near future. We are also planning to have a Q&A portion at the end of the event. So please submit any and all questions that you have into the chat box, which can be found on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And we'll be monitoring that chat box throughout the presentation and collecting for the end. Next slide, please. So the next thing, just for your viewing pleasure, is if you want to, up at the top, there is a View Options button. You can select side-by-side mode. This will allow you just to see whoever is speaking along with the presentation. So just so for your own viewing pleasure, like I said, you don't have to do it, but it is something that helps if you just want to follow along with the presenter who is speaking at the time. And with that, I'm super excited to introduce our first presenter, Angela Bellis. So Angela is a macro social worker and PhD candidate with the University of Connecticut School of Social Work, and is the current graduate assistant with the Nancy A. Humphreys Institute for Political Social Work. Her work with the Institute is focused on increasing civic engagement and voting power among the Yukon-Hartford community and through the Hartford Votes, Hartford Vote Us coalition. Her work is grounded in concepts of electoral justice and inclusive democracy. And with that, Angela, take it away.
Well, thank you, Danielle, for that lovely introduction, and good morning, everyone. As Danielle said, my name is Angela Bellis, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Yukon School of Social Work and a graduate assistant with the Nancy A. Humphreys Institute for Political Social Work. Our mission at the Institute is to increase the political participation and the power of all social workers and the communities we serve so that public policy reflects our expertise, our professional values, and our commitment to a more socially just and equitable society. There are nearly 700,000 social workers in the US who touch 12 million lives a day, and many of you were on this call. We have the power to change the policy, systems, and culture around voting in our country. Our mission is to build an inclusive democracy that works for and responds to all individuals. We know that who votes matters, and that having access to voting, healthy, safe, easy, convenient access to voting matters. Voter turnout can tell an important story about power in our communities. Who votes in higher rates often correlates with increased resources, better schools. You can take it back to the last slide, please, Don. Better schools, streets, lights, all of the resources we need. Turnout among cities and states can also be instructive about where power lies in that state. This also applies to swing states and the balance of power in Congress and the electoral map. So not only does participation and turnout matter to a healthy, inclusive democracy that responds to the needs of all individuals, representation matters. It matters to have people with lived experience and historically marginalized identities in circles of power making change from the inside. I want to share an example that resonates today in 2020 in particular, in a season of uprisings in the wake of the public murder of George Floyd, the murder of Breonna Taylor, and countless others. When Michael Brown was fatally shot on August 9th, 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri, we got a glimpse into a community that was 70% African American, yet had nearly all white city council elected officials, even though white people only made up 12.9% of Ferguson residents. A city council that raised revenue by aggressively stopping and ticketing people, disproportionately Black and brown residents. This led to a toxic relationship between the police and those it was hired to serve and protect. One of the first steps activists took to rebuild Ferguson during and after the protests was to register residents to vote. The following local election had a 30% turnout, and half of city council now identify as Black. And this year, in 2020, Ella Jones was elected as the first African-American woman mayor. Ferguson is trying to rebuild a new future with new leadership. And we know that voting is a powerful and central tool for social change. Next slide, please. But we know that we have a problem with voter turnout. As we prepare for this election on November 3rd, we must understand turnout in the 2016 election. It's startling in this map to see that more people stayed home than voted for either candidate. More people stayed home than voted for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump in 2016. Nearly 100 million eligible voters. I encourage all of you to read the Knight Foundation's 100 Million Project report, and the link is embedded in this slide, which will be shared with you. They surveyed 12,000 non-voters to examine their political attitudes and behavior, as well as to understand how they get information about politics and elections. Non-voters are much more likely to be lower income, have less education, be non-white, and unmarried. Among the findings, non-voters are far more likely to feel that the system is rigged, that their vote doesn't matter, and to feel less informed. They are likely to be less engaged with news and information. This study also found that Gen Z, young people ages 18 to 24, is even less interested in politics than other non-voters and least likely to vote in 2020. Voter turnout is particularly problematic when we look at local and state elections where we see far lower turnout. On average, 1 in 2 people vote in state elections and 1 in 4 for local elections. That's on average. We have substantial research showing that elected officials give more attention and more resources to communities that got them elected. Further, campaigns generally ignore non-voters. All of those flyers that many of us receive from candidates saying, vote for me, this is what I'm about. Well, most of these campaigns don't mail them to people who aren't registered or actively vote in elections. So non-voters aren't even being asked. There are serious consequences when only 5%, 10%, even 20% of the electorate turns out for an election. This leads to concentrated and often toxic power. Remember that in cities and areas of the country dominated by one party, like in many cities and towns in Connecticut, it's the primary that often serves as the general election. Primaries that are often not as widely publicized. In Connecticut, our primaries for state and local elections run in August or early September. People are not often thinking about elections at this time, and so we typically see even lower turnout during primaries. Next slide, please. What we know is that systematic structural barriers make the act of voting difficult, especially for marginalized, low-income, and more mobile populations, fueling engagement barriers. As Kylie mentioned earlier on, we all need to know our history and that the crisis of our democracy didn't start in 2016 or even in the last decade. The founding fathers of the United States literally wrote white supremacy into the Constitution. While we have corrected and expanded voting rights, voter suppression continues in race-neutral language like felony disenfranchisement laws, confusing state-by-state laws, and the heavily administrative, inconsistent, and hyper-local way we choose to run our elections. We left voting laws to the states. Who can vote in a primary and how? It's different in every state. Whether you can register online is determined state by state. There are 12 states that still don't offer online voter registration in 2020. Whether you can register and vote on the same day, like we have here in Connecticut, is also determined state by state. Whether or not you can vote while you are incarcerated or have a felony conviction is determined state by state. And this can be especially confusing when we live and work between states or move during an election year. In 48 states, you are restricted from voting incarcerated. Only Vermont and Maine have no restrictions. In some states, you remain barred while you're on parole. In some states, it continues while you're on probation. And in some states, it's a lifetime ban. In Connecticut, people with a felony conviction can vote pre-trial, before, when they're in jail or prison pre-trial, or after completing parole. This means that people with a felony conviction in Connecticut can vote while on probation, but many people don't need this, or know this, I'm sorry. Some states make it very administratively burdensome, and some require all fines to be paid, which feels a lot like a poll tax. In Connecticut statute, it does say that people with a felony conviction need to have all of their fines paid to be able to register to vote. According to the ACLU Connecticut, this is not enforced. However, many organizations are still trying to get this changed in state statute. Other ways that it gets complicated and confusing and also deters people from voting, the way we manage voter lists and elections can also keep people from exercising their right. The systems are complicated and often administered in manual ways still, and inconsistent across states or even municipalities. So voting in a city is often very different from voting in a healthy suburb or a college town or a rural area. The picture that you see here is the long lines that people faced to cast their ballot in Texas for the primary. And the graphic above is also based on numbers in Texas in the 2016 election. And what you see on the left is a third of the people with those I voted t-shirts and 2/3 with the caption, "We didn't vote because it won't make a difference." This graphic and what we know about the huge numbers of non-voters sends a very powerful message about how easy change could be with more of us voting. So other suppression tactics include strict voter ID rules, the purging of voter lists, challenging student voter registrations, reduction in poll locations, especially last minute. So you think you're voting in one place, but really that place isn't open anymore. Strict rules around use of absentee ballots, allegations of voter fraud, which data shows us is quite the myth, and also gerrymandering. One more note on felony disenfranchisement. 20 million people in our country have a felony conviction, and in 2016, nearly 6 million were barred from voting because of their felony conviction. Many of these laws were written into the state constitutions and statutes specifically to limit the political power of marginalized and Black and brown populations. While these laws are race neutral in their language, they continue to be racist in their impact when you have a criminal justice system that is more punitive and disproportionately targets Black and brown communities. Social workers and human service providers need to know these rules, or we contribute to voter suppression. Most people mistakenly believe that you might lose the right to vote forever after a felony conviction. We must also ensure that people in pretrial detention who often can't afford bail are allowed to vote by absentee ballot. Next slide, please. So, as we know, voting is central to our mission, our professional mandates, and our impact in the communities we serve. Voting is a social determinant of health. Individuals and communities that vote are better off in important and measurable ways in terms of individual and community health indicators. Higher rates of health, mental health, education, employment all exist in communities with higher rates of voting. Voting has been shown to be a robust indicator of future education and earnings in young people. And to further illustrate its power, recidivism rates dropped dramatically in 2 studies when formerly incarcerated individuals were given back the right to vote. Voting is a basic human right. Supporting people to vote empowers them to be change agents in their communities. Fighting against the systemic barriers, reducing voter suppression, restoring and expanding voting rights are all ways on a policy level that we can have a huge impact. But on the individual level or in our work with smaller groups, we need to also know that voting is an act of power, both individually and collectively. And when we empower people to vote, we are helping people to exercise their human right, and we are influencing the social determinant of health. Next slide, please. So let's talk about voting as a social work intervention. People need easy ways to register. They need information about how, when, and where to vote. They need to know where to find information on a candidate, which oftentimes on the local level and sometimes even on the state level is not easy to find. And just as importantly, people need to be encouraged and empowered to vote and need to be reminded that our votes do matter. We can build collective power for change in communities, showing the importance of our vote on our community. Voting is a relational behavior. It's a socially contagious behavior. On the macro level, we must reimagine a better way to fix policy and systemic barriers. Social workers and human service providers cannot only advocate for voting rights and access, but we can also participate as elected officials, as poll workers, as poll monitors to ensure that everyone's vote is counted. We must ask questions, pay attention, and demand transparency. But most of all, we can encourage and empower the clients, the communities, even our friends and families and colleagues to participate in our democracy democracy and to know that our vote does matter, especially when we think about how powerful the non-vote has been. A reminder for all of us, nonpartisan voter engagement is legal and in some cases is even mandated by the 1993 Voter Registration Act, also known as the Motor Voter Law. Most nonprofits who sign clients up for federal benefits like Medicaid are required voter registration, but a form in a stack or on a table is an engagement. We have to embed voter engagement into our conversations with individuals, in groups, with our staff, and at the policy level. Organizations can provide ongoing training and support and tools for our staff. We can build civic literacy and engagement into our culture and our services. And we can continue to advocate for expanding and restoring voting rights and expanding and protecting safe, easy access to voting. And we need to be emphasizing local and state elections and the primaries as well, because important decisions are made here. Next slide, please. So let's turn this into action. How can we support the political power and voices of our clients and our community? How can we collectively support innovations in social work practice and in our social service agencies that honor our communities, clients, and own power for change? Well, first, this 10 days left is no longer the case, but we can still encourage clients, friends, to participate in the 2020 census today. The deadline has changed multiple times due to the pandemic and political engineering. So today is the last day for door-to-door counting and the last day for mail-in responses to be postmarked. People can still respond online or by phone until 6 a.m. tomorrow, October 16th. Every person missed in the census costs a state and community anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 in federal funding over the next decade. The census determines political power, policy decisions, and investments in business and infrastructure. We can still be registering folks to vote and helping them register. We're asking folks to text VOTE SW to 34444 as one way to check their registration. That's a tool you can use too, but there are so many tools. We can still use paper registrations in Connecticut, but online registration is also a simple tool for many people. We have until October 27th to help folks register. And then, of course, in Connecticut, people can also register on the day of election. We're telling folks apply for an absentee ballot as soon as possible. Understand the absentee ballot process, which I believe one of our speakers later on will share more about. We can download copies of the ballots and/or links to candidate guides and forums to share with people to become more informed voters. One more note on the absentee ballot: how we complete the application and how we complete the ballot also matters. There are very rigid instructions and reminders to sign, date, and seal the inner envelopes. And while absentee ballots can be mailed in, there are drop boxes in every municipality, which I will share a map to those drop boxes in the chat a little later on. And again, we can and should be encouraging folks to vote, including people with a felony conviction if they are pretrial or have completed parole. Next. We know that when we all vote, we build power together. And this means working across our social work and social service settings, whether we work in shelters, whether we work in healthcare settings, whether we work in schools or clinics or libraries. We can be working with the client community members who we see, who we touch, metaphorically, not literally, to make sure that they are registered to vote using their current address, even if that happens to be a shelter address, for instance. We can make sure that how, when, and where to vote. We can share easy information on candidates. We can help folks. We know how to make accommodations to make sure they are able to vote. And we can continue to educate and enforce what we know about voting rights. But this all starts with encouraging and empowering folks to participate in our democracy. Next slide, please. So we have many simple tools in place to offer and share with you on the votingisocialwork.org website. I'll drop that in the chat box as well. We hope that you will visit and see how many tools are available for you to use today, tomorrow, next week, to make this work as easy as possible. Next slide, please. So thank you for your time this morning. Really, all I want to say before passing it on is it will take all of us to create a better future for our clients, and with our clients, our community, and ourselves. People in power have always known that voting matters. With higher turnout, we'll get more candidates who will be more accountable and will make better leaders and better decisions. Please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or our director at the Humphreys Institute, Tanya Rhodes Smith, if you have questions or would like more information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. I'm always just so fascinated and so excited by your energy and your passion on this topic. So thank you for joining us today. I want to quickly turn it over to our next presenter, Tori Beret. And Tori is our second macro social worker on today's panel. She serves as the housing advocacy organizer with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Tori joins us today to share more about the work that the National Low Income Housing Coalition is doing to support civic engagement, education, and mobilization among housing and homeless service providers, advocates, and renters. With that, I'll pass it over to you, Tori.
Great, thanks Danielle, appreciate it. Thanks for having me on today. Like Danielle said, I'm with the, I am, okay, I just wanted to make sure I was unmuted. I'm with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. I'm a housing advocacy organizer there. I am going to be talking about what we're doing to encourage folks to vote and to work with their renters and people experiencing homelessness to vote. I'm also going to be talking about you know, why this matters and what policy folks that vote can really influence, especially as it relates to housing, and you know what the issues we have right now are in terms of the affordable housing crisis, and how we can move forward, and how having more voters that care about these issues will really impact the affordable housing crisis. So first, those that are not familiar with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, we're solely dedicated to ensuring that the lowest income folks, seniors, people with disabilities, families with young children, people experiencing homelessness, have access to safe, decent, affordable, and accessible homes. And our members include nonprofit housing providers, homeless service providers, faith housing organizations, state and local housing coalitions, a whole array of folks, as well as low-income renters and people experiencing homelessness themselves. And we work on policy solutions, again, to address the affordable housing crisis. Next slide. So currently we're engaged with the Our Homes, Our Votes 2020 project, which is focused on elevating the conversation of affordable housing in the 2020 presidential elections, and on providing tools and resources to people who want to engage voters and candidates at all levels of government, not just the national elections. Next slide. So Our Homes, Our Votes is nonpartisan. It's focused on helping providers and nonprofits register voters, educate voters about how to vote, what to bring with them to the polls, what's on the ballot, and then also mobilize voters. So getting them to the polls on election day, or in the case of this year's elections, making sure they submit their mail-in ballots or absentee ballots in the correct way. Next slide. And we're engaging in this work for a simple reason. As you might know or might expect, renters vote at a lower rate than homeowners. Most elections, it's about a 20-point turnout difference, give or take, between renters and homeowners. Next slide. And this disparity is even greater when you look at the differences by income. So households under $20,000 a year vote at much lower rates than households above $100,000. And so we believe this disparity in voter turnout leads to a disparity and attention that renters and homeowners receive from policymakers, and that low-income people and high-income people receive from policymakers. And we need to address this imbalance so we can have fair and strong policy that supports rental housing moving forward. Next slide. And we know that the public agrees with us, so 83% of the public agree that elected officials are not paying enough attention to the cost of housing and the need for a more affordable housing, and 76% say they are more likely to vote for a candidate that has a detailed plan for making housing more affordable. Next slide. So what are we doing at NLIC to increase voter engagement among low-income renters and people experiencing homelessness? We're doing this in a lot of different ways, but one way is we are creating or have created the Our Homes, Our Votes affiliates effort. So any organization is welcome to participate. It's basically supporting folks that agree that they are doing nonpartisan efforts to engage voters in terms of registering them, getting them out to the polls, and educating them about their rights and you know, how the voting process works. And tenant associations, homeless service providers, tribal organizations, student groups, neighborhood organizations, really anyone that's doing this great work are welcome to be affiliates. And as an affiliate, you'll receive swag, a swag bag. You'll also be able to use our branded images and logos. You'll have access to flyers and other resources that you can use to promote voting. You'll be promoted by us in our social media and in our newsletters, and you'll be and yeah, so and you also get support from staff. So if you're interested, there's a link in this slide. We're also doing the Housing Providers Council, which we're supporting housing providers. Our goal, I forgot to put a slide on this, but our goal is to get enough housing providers involved that represent 1 million voters in subsidized housing. So right now we have around 600,000 units of subsidized housing, part of the Housing Providers Council, which is really, really exciting. And so we're still working on getting more folks involved in that effort. So if you're interested in that, please let me know. We're providing, again, support and resources for people that sign up for that as well. Next slide. So what exactly, so I'm talking, you know, we're talking about it's important that people vote, that everyone votes, but especially folks that have not, sorry, I'm like getting my words all mixed up, have not voted in the past or tend to not show up to vote in the past for a variety of reasons, which Angela went over. So what are the issues? One is huge, which is the affordable housing crisis. So even before the current COVID-19 pandemic happened, the country was in the grips of an affordable housing crisis impacting rural, urban, and suburban communities alike. And so the crisis has many dimensions, but the fundamental issue is that there's a mismatch between what people earn or otherwise have available to spend for their homes and what housing costs. And rents have risen much faster than renters' incomes over the last 2 decades. In fact, since 1960, renters' incomes have increased by only 5%, while rents have risen 61%. So while more low-income people are renting their homes than ever before, the supply of affordable housing and rental assistance has not kept pace. So this means that there's only 7 million affordable rental homes for the nation's 11 million lowest income renter households, assuming that they spend no more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And not all of these 7 million homes are available for the lowest income renters. So more than 3 million of them are occupied by higher income households. So as a result, only 4 million affordable and available rental homes exist for 11 million lowest income renter households. In other words, for every 10 of the lowest income seniors, people with disabilities, families with children, veterans, there are fewer than 4 affordable homes available to them. Next slide. And so the shortage of affordable and available homes for the lowest income renters ranges from most severe to least severe, but there is no state with enough homes for its lowest income renters. In Connecticut, there are 41 affordable and available homes for every 100 extremely low income renters. So our gap report just shows the shortage of affordable and available homes for households at different income thresholds. So this graph shows that there are 36 affordable and available homes for every 100 households at 30% of the area median income, which is about $12,000 a year for an individual. And folks that are, you know, spending more on their homes are cost burdened, and if they're spending 50% or more of their income on rent, they're severely cost burdened. And people that are extremely low income are bearing the brunt of cost burden. So they're the ones that are most likely they're in the highest income, their income category. They're the ones that have the highest amount of folks that are cost burdened and severely cost burdened. And then if you're cost burdened, you have less money to spend on food, on healthcare, on emergencies that happen, and that means that you are less likely to experience a homelessness or to experience really housing instability. And so again, it's really important why we address this issue. Next slide. And then we also have our out of reach report, which looks at the housing wage. So the hourly wage of full-time worker needs to afford a modest apartment. And in 2020, the national housing wage was $23.96 per hour for a 2-bedroom apartment and $19.56 per hour for a 1-bedroom apartment. And the average minimum wage worker must work nearly 97 hours per week, more than 2 full-time jobs, to afford a 2-bedroom rental home, or 79 hours a week, 2 full-time jobs, to afford a 1-bedroom rental home at the fair market rent, which is absolutely absurd. And so while the housing wage varies from state to state and county to county, and only 5% of all US counties can a full-time minimum wage worker afford a 1-bedroom rental home at fair market rent. And the shortage of rental homes affordable to the lowest income people is caused by market failure and chronic underfunding of solutions. Without government intervention, decent and affordable homes cannot be reliably built, operated, and maintained at a price that the very lowest income workers, seniors, or people with disabilities can afford. And the private market can't on its own solve the persistent market failure. Government intervention in the form of subsidies is necessary to fill the gap between what people can afford to pay and the cost of developing and operating rental homes. Next slide. So lastly, so what are the solutions? So Congress should significantly expand investments in affordable housing for America's lowest income people and most marginalized households to help end homelessness and housing poverty once and for all. So there's 4 main strategies that we talk about that are long-term strategies. So one is significantly expanding the supply of housing affordable to the lowest income renters, creating a new national program that provides temporary financial assistance to help cover rent for households experiencing unexpected economic shocks, expanding rental assistance, and also preserving the country's limited affordable housing stock. So a substantial expansion of rental assistance for the most vulnerable households is key element of any successful strategy. Vouchers help people with the lowest incomes afford housing in the private market by paying landlords the difference between what a household can afford to pay for rent and the rent itself up to a reasonable amount. And housing vouchers are also flexible, so families can use them to rent homes that best meet their needs. And housing vouchers may also be tied to a specific housing development in a way that facilitates the development's financing and makes it easier for owners to provide health and other services that some people need. So vouchers are the most common form for rental assistance, but other promising policy innovations could be used to reach more families, such as creating a new federal renters tax credit. And a variety of renters tax credit proposals have been advanced, including some that would target aid to the nation's lowest income and most marginalized households. Also, in markets where vacancies in existing buildings are scarce, supply side approaches are also essential to produce more affordable homes. And one of the ways that we can do that is through increasing funding to the National Housing Trust Fund, which is a dedicated funding stream to efficiently build, rehab, preserve, and operate rental housing for extremely low-income people. And then another way to address the affordable housing shortage is to fund public housing. There's roughly 1 million public housing units that are currently home to 2.6 million residents. Public housing has been chronically underfunded over the past 50, 60 years. And so public housing has decreased in supply, and it also there's a lot of needed repairs, and so we need to fund capital improvements for public housing. We need to make sure that there's enough funding to repair all the damages and needed repairs in public housing, and so also make sure that the waiting lists for public housing can be shortened because they're very long. And then also the Congress should create a national housing stabilization fund to provide emergency assistance to the lowest income households to prevent housing instability and homelessness. And especially in cases like we're seeing right now with COVID-19, seeing that rental assistance programs are very necessary to prevent people from being evicted during, national crises, but also family emergencies that people undergo. So that was just a quick overview of, why we need to encourage folks that are renters and people experiencing homelessness, why they need to vote, and if they do vote, what kind of changes they can have on especially the affordable housing crisis. So thanks, Danielle. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tori, so much. And I'm definitely excited to see more of the work that the National Low Income Housing Coalition does in this space moving forward. And if you're not already an affiliate with our Homes Our Votes program, I'll plug it again. You should definitely consider it. Who doesn't want free resources and swag? So thank you, Tori. That was really, really great presentation. And next, and finally, we have Sarah Fox. So Sarah is our third and final macro social worker on today's panel. Sarah is the Director of Advocacy and Community Impact with the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. She is also a former intern of the Humphreys Institute. And Sarah is with us to talk today a little bit more about the work CCH is doing to get out the vote and how they're supporting homeless and housing service providers in the state in the weeks leading up to the election. So the floor is all yours, Sarah.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to join this panel today. I want to say, as a person who has experienced homelessness, I experienced it as a very young child, and also experienced a lot of housing instability in my teen years and when I went to college. I can honestly say that that loss of stability often comes with a loss of agency and a loss of a feeling of power. And for me, voting helped to reinstill that power. It was a way to have impact. It was a way to communicate what I wanted to see in the world, often at times when I didn't feel as though I had any power at all. So, when I think about all of the individuals across Connecticut who are experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity today, I can't help but liken it to the feelings that I had and have had, and you still have if you have experienced homelessness. It's not something that just goes away, you feel it forever. And I think about just what it means to, whether it's in a shelter across the state or you're a housing provider or you're working with someone who's unsheltered, just what it means to work with someone and help empower them to vote and have that voice, and then what it means for them to vote. So that's why I'm so dedicated. In these last 17 days before the election, we are at a pivotal time in the state, a time to help voters understand their rights, to be present at the polls, and to make a difference in the policies that affect them the most. And so, it's great to be here today. It's great to see so many friends and colleagues from across the state, but it's also great to be sharing this message. And we at CCH have been providing tools. We also have been, and Don, you can switch to the next slide after that. Tools to help providers understand best what you need to vote. We also have great tools from the Our Homes, Our Vote campaign, and the National Alliance to End Homelessness also has a ton of tools as well. I have to say, if you Google homelessness and voting, one of the top things that comes up is the page for the Connecticut Secretary of State. They are well along in being one of the best resources for homelessness and voting that I've found to date. And they have a lot of specific information on what it means to help your clients. So I recommend that you go there, you print out the page, and you make it available to your clients. So I'm going to walk through a lot of that. And Don, you can go to the next page. But I think the key message and key takeaway for me before I jump into voter eligibility is we have a United States president to vote for. In Connecticut, we have 5 members of the U.S. House of Representatives, and we have all 187 state legislators to vote for as well. And every vote matters. So even if you think that your vote doesn't matter, if your client thinks that their vote doesn't matter, it does. And so use the tools and resources available to you to have conversations about why people's votes matter and to help to encourage them to feel that same sense of power. For voter eligibility, and I saw in the chat earlier that this was a question, you know, a lot of people who are homeless, as you've heard before, don't believe that they can vote. And it can also be a very mystifying process. You have to be a citizen of Connecticut and a citizen of the United States and at least 17 years old, turning 18 by election day. And you do have to have completed your period of confinement and parole if you were ever imprisoned and convicted of a felony, and you have to have paid your fines. Anyone in violation of an election law has to do a little bit more deeper search to just make sure, and they have to reach out to the criminal, I'm gonna get it wrong, but it's the Division of Justice. It's on the state, and see and just make sure that they're eligible to vote as well. But for voter eligibility, having conversations regularly with the people that you're working with and helping them to understand that they're eligible is really important. Danielle. For residency requirements, this can be something that is particularly challenging for people to understand. I have to say that at certain points in time, you know, when I've read through everything, it does get confusing. But it is in the nexus of the given town. And even if your client is experiencing unsheltered homelessness, and even if they are sleeping on a bench, if it is in the town that they are claiming residency, then that is what matters. A residency at that park bench and where that is, and if that is their home, they can vote and they can submit all of their voter registration in that town. What's really important in this election, and when you heard earlier from Angela, you know, we have to make sure that votes count and that they're not going to be challenged. And so you're only able to vote once, and your residency requirements certainly matter greatly. So, you know, this information is also on that fact sheet from the Secretaries of State's office. I encourage you, if you have any questions, to reach out to them for further clarification. It's just really important to make sure that you have a decent understanding when you're talking to the people that you're working with about the towns that they are residents in. Danielle. Don. Okay, so the difference between a physical and mailing address. You can vote by the location of your physical address. You can also have a mailing address. So if you have a client and their mailing address is, well, if they submit a mailing address, that mailing address, like if it is a shelter, will go to that shelter. And so there's a few key things about this to think about. If you're working with a person who has a housing plan today, And within the next couple of days, they will be moving, and they will not be in the location any longer, that, or they might not be in your, in the shelter that you're working with them. If they are a person who is being diverted and they're moving into a house at the first of the month, these are all things to be talking to your clients about when they're developing their individualized voting plan. Because on voting election day, you want to make sure that they're registered to vote in their town of residency. So if you perhaps are a person who is a client in the greater New Haven can, and you are moving into an apartment in New Haven at the first of the month, that is where you need to be registered to vote in if you are going to register and if you are going to be living in that town. So these are just things to be very cognizant of and to be careful about, and to think more deeply on when you're having conversations with the people that you're working with. We can move to the next slide. Voter identification requirements. As many of you know, in the world of ending homelessness, oftentimes documents can be some of the biggest challenges that we face. And for that reason, you do not have to per se have a photo ID available, but you do need to have a name and an address, or a name and a signature, or a name and a photograph. If you're voting for a first time in a municipality and you lack proper identification, there might be things that each location requires. You do want to reach out to the registrar of voters in the town that you're voting in for more information on ID requirements, but it's pretty simple. And so, if you're working with someone and they live, let's say, in Willimantic, do call the local town of the registrar of voters and just make sure that you have exactly what they will need. But you do not have to have exactly a photo ID. We can go on to the next slide. Voter registration is pretty easy in this state. You can go online, you can register at the Secretary of State's website. You can also complete paper forms. What you really need to do is pay attention to everything I said a little bit before, just where a person's residing. Sometimes it might make more sense for people to fill out the written form and to submit it in one of the ballot boxes, just to make sure that it's done. If you have clients who you're working with, who are going to, as part of their housing plan, be in shelter past November 3rd, absentee voting, which I'll get into in a bit, makes a ton of sense. And so you want to think about what the best type of voting is for the people that you're working with. Registering by paper can be a really great way if you're hosting a voter registration and you're a provider. You see this flyer here, the lead advocates in the Meriden, Middlesex, Wallingford can. They have been hosting voter registrations, and they'll continue to do so until November 3rd. And they're standing outside of food pantries. They are going to places where they know where people experiencing homelessness are, and they're helping to get them registered to vote. If that's something that you're interested in doing, please reach out to me. We can help provide further assistance to you, but these are things to start, if you haven't started already, and I do hope that you have, that you start thinking about. You also need to look up polling locations. These can be easily found. The Secretary of State's office has a link on their website where you can actually basically type in where you're at, and it will tell you your polling location. And I believe Angela is sending out something in a bit. Voter registration, they're also going to want to know your party affiliation if you are affiliated to someone. And then absentee ballot. If you are working with someone who is not registered to vote, they cannot, it's not just as simple as registering to vote. You also have to complete an absentee ballot registration form. And then, as Angela said earlier, and we'll go down in the slides, you have to be meticulous in completing that form, and you need to make sure that it is dropped in a ballot box and that you have signed it exactly right. This is something where if you're working with someone who perhaps has any cognitive issues, you may want to walk with them very carefully through the form. And there are definitely a lot of specifics around who how many forms are handed out. If you're working with, if you're a provider and you can hand out 5 forms, these specifics are all laid out on the Secretary of State's website as well. So just make sure that you have, and the League of Women Voters in Connecticut is outstanding. So they're also a great resource. And Angela, I hope you add them to the chat as well, because they have everything you need to know about absentee voting, as does the Connecticut Secretary of State's office. Then on the next page, we at CCH sort of broke down the top 3 things that we felt people experiencing homelessness need to know when they're voting. And there is also a QR code. So if you do host a voter registration, or if you're just working with clients on a day-to-day basis and you want to help to ensure that they are getting registered to vote, and it's something that they are very interested in, you can just sort of print this out, hang it in your organization, and then encourage them to use the QR code to register to vote online. Next slide. I covered this a little bit earlier, but, and I apologize. Sometimes I speed through my presentations like this. The other thing that's really important for everyone to know is that Connecticut polling places are open from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on election day, and any voter standing in line will be allowed to cast a ballot. You see in the slides, and I know that the partnership will be sending them out, the Secretary of State's online locator that will tell you exactly where you need to vote and what your polling place is if you are not utilizing an absentee ballot. And again, that absentee ballot, as I think both Tori and Angela shared, is so critical, especially considering the pandemic today. And if it is possible for you, the people that you're working with, to stay home and stay safe and submit their ballot via absentee ballot, that's definitely the best way to go. If it's not feasible, then utilizing the state's online locator and going to your polling place is the next best available option. We also have same-day voter registration here in Connecticut, so people can register to vote on election day. And you just need to really make sure that you have the ID available that I discussed earlier. So either name and photograph, name and signature, and whatever works in the town that you're located. Done. Okay, and here, here it is. We haven't addressed, we've talked about it, but here's a slide on it. So all voters, and this is a new thing because it has never been this way before, but because of the coronavirus pandemic, all voters are eligible, registered voters are eligible to vote by absentee ballot in this election. A few things for you to really think through with the people that you're working with is only completed absentee ballots received before the close of polls on election day will be counted. So that means that you have to think about the mail system, and you have to think about even perhaps how slow mail has been taking every day. And so we're reliant on the United States Postal Service to get if people are mailing, and that's why the ballot boxes are so important. So you really want to encourage every person that you're working with to not utilize the United States Postal Service if possible. If it is 100% necessary, then that's a good way to go, but they should be getting and submitting them now. You don't want people to be getting their votes in too late so that they're not going to be able to be counted. So think through these things. There's also at the Secretary of State's office a way to submit sort of a 6-day a rushed absentee ballot process. And so click on, go to their website, find more information on that as well. So there's an expedited process if it's needed, but you want to make sure that it's submitted and in the ballot box before the close of election day. And so please, if you take anything away today, take that. Get registered to vote, submit your absentee ballot, put it in the ballot box. And just lastly, we had the opportunity to have a great conversation earlier just a couple of weeks ago with the Disability Rights Connecticut, and they are providing a lot of tools to people who are disabled, who need assistance when it comes to voting. And so we wanted to make sure that you're aware of this resource, that you're able to tell your clients about these resources. You can see their contact information here. So if either you or the clients that you're working with have any form of a disability, these are the people to know, and they can help connect you with the services that you need. Okay, I think. So thank you so much. I hope that you take from this whole day the spirit of voting, the excitement that comes with it, but also some of the challenges that it presents to the people that you're working with. Again, I encourage you to access all the resources like the League of Women Voters Connecticut, Voting is Social Work, and the Connecticut Secretary of State's websites for the information that you need to help your clients vote.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I know we'll be continuing to work together in the coming months and in future elections to increase voter turnout and engagement in our work to end homelessness. And I'll say this again, but thank you so much to all of our presenters today. This is really a great wealth of information and a topic that's really important in this time and just in general as we think about our work and think about our role and responsibility as citizens. Next, we have the Q&A portion of our presentation. I have some questions prepared. I'd love to hear from more of our audience members. There were 2 questions that came up in the chat, and I know they were also answered in the chat, but I did want to raise at least one of them again for our other panelists to be able to respond to. So the question that came up was, if we recommend Congress to pass legislation for long-term strategies to rental assistance, how can we bend the ear of our Congress people that do not want to pass legislation that supports our lowest income citizens? And provided an example, the COVID relief talks don't seem to be going anywhere because our legislators don't seem to want to spend the money. So I know, Tori, you responded to this in the chat. I don't know if you have any more thoughts you'd like to add, and then we can turn it over to our other presenters.
Yeah, this was a great question. I will say with the COVID talks, especially now because of like the elections, it's getting a little bit political, and so that's one of the reasons why we're not seeing anything right now is because, as we get closer to the elections, the more likely one side can say, oh, hey, like we did this and they didn't, and that kind of thing. So that's why there isn't really any movement right now. We're all hoping that something is passed after the elections, but we thought something was going to move forward about last week because Nancy Pelosi was working with the administration trying to come up with a package that worked for both sides that included rental assistance, but it looked like those negotiations have collapsed. So we're keeping an eye out, and that's one thing that we are very much tracking because we're trying to get $100 billion passed for rental assistance, and especially with, the CDC eviction moratorium is active, but it is, people are still being evicted in the meantime, and we just need to, eviction is just a stopgap measure. It's not doing anything to help people that have all this rent accruing from lots of jobs. But in terms of the how can you make the case for low-income housing argument, I used to work in Pennsylvania and at a statewide advocacy organization, and one of the arguments we found in PA that worked really well, especially for some folks on more the conservative side, was making the economic argument. So saying, affording, paying for supported housing for somebody is more cost effective than, incarceration or long-term stay in a mental health facility or those kind of services, or not services, but those kind of other aspects. And then also, it's job creation, especially in this type of environment, and also making the health is housing argument, especially now with COVID-19. I think that one is very, very important argument to be making is, protecting people being provided housing is protecting them from the COVID-19 epidemic. So hopefully some of that messaging will help. But yeah, I don't know if other people have suggestions too.
Angela or Sarah, do either of you have thoughts on this or would like to weigh in?
I was waiting to see if Angela did. But I just say, you know, similar to what Victoria just said, we have been echoing cost effectiveness in this state and the need for housing, and even now today, the right to housing with our legislators, and really working to help them understand that having an individual stably housed, you know, that's the best for community. It saves money, it saves dollars, it saves lives. And today, you know, I would say in general, our Connecticut legislators and our federal delegation, they're saying the same things to their colleagues and echoing what we've been saying for a long time. So that advocacy is definitely working and is impactful and effective. But, you know, I think that, as Tori said earlier, you know, she was working in Pennsylvania, in Connecticut, and even thinking beyond and thinking to all the social workers across the nation, Angela and and Danielle and Tori, you know, it's really, this has to be a bipartisan effort. We have to be speaking to even those who may not be staunch supporters of housing for everyone. And homes for all. So having those conversations, helping to convince legislators about what it means to be housed, and that no person in Connecticut, in the nation, should be homeless, especially, I mean, anytime, but during the pandemic as well. It's just, you know, it is not something that is safe. And so we must be vigilant in our advocacy. And I think that cost effectiveness is still one of the most important things to share because it makes a difference to all policymakers at all points in time. And we can really show through our data that the work that we're doing not only matters, but it has results. And it saves a ton of money, because the people who we are housing today, for the most part, are, you know, they're staying housed. They're not, if they are someone who is infirm, their hospital visits are going down. They're not utilizing ambulance services as much or as readily. And for those who have, who are just as impacted, the rates of recidivism reduced substantially. And so those are things that we know that are really important when we're talking to policymakers.
Thank you, Sarah. Those are all really great points. And Angela, I'll open it up in case you have any thoughts or any of the work that the Humphreys Institute has been doing in this regard.
I really think that Tori and Sarah covered a lot of important ground, so I'm going to choose to not be redundant, but thank you, Danielle.
Perfect, no worries. All right, so I want to dive into some other questions. I'll still open it up if folks in the chat have any questions based on new information you've learned or things that we've discussed. Please feel free to share, but I've also prepared a few questions for our panelists. My first one is that all of you guys have shared so many wonderful resources that you look to, that you use to inform your work, that informs other people's work. I know our audience is a lot of avid readers and always interested in learning more to inform their practice. What resources do you look to outside of some of the ones that you've named? If there's any others that we should highlight or elevate for folks to reference, I'd love to be able to share that information with folks. And I'll open it up.
Sure. So Danielle, what I'd like folks to know is that on our Voting is Social Work website, we have an entire page dedicated to resource sharing. Includes a wide variety of resources.
Angela, we may have lost your connection.
Repository with many resources in one place, and I'll drop the link again in the chat box.
Awesome, thank you. Sarah or Tori, do either of you have any other resources that you haven't named already that you would like folks to be aware about
Yes, I'm actually looking up the page right now, but we have a bunch of other national, there's a lot of national resources out there in terms of, especially nonprofit vote is one, in terms of encouraging nonprofits to get involved in voter engagement work and helping nonprofits do it in a way that's nonpartisan. And then there's a lot of great resources just on registering voters, engaging voters, and protecting voters' rights as well. So I will share a bunch of those different websites in the chat momentarily.
Awesome, thank you. And Sarah, I don't know if you have anything. If not, that's okay. We have, like I said, a ton of resources, but if you do, please.
I was just going to say, and just to echo Tori, I mean, the Everyone Votes page from the National Alliance to End Homelessness, they have a great PDF about how to work and encourage your clients to vote. And they have, and I think you do as well in yours, Tori, but they have a much more, it's very provider-centric, case manager, frontline centric information that can be very helpful. You know, if it's your first time encouraging someone to vote. So I was trying to get it into the chat box, but if someone else wants to put the Everyone Votes into the chat box, that would be amazing. The Alliance for Nonprofits in Connecticut has also been doing great candidate forums. This is something that I have to say, I wish that we had gotten started a lot earlier, but some other wonderful organizations are taking the lead. They actually have one today that's taking place in Greater New Haven. So, you know, they have a lot of tools as well. And so if you're interested in their voting campaign, you know, you can reach out to Jeff Shaw, he's their policy director. And if anyone wants to go in and share the links to the Alliance for Connecticut Nonprofits, that would be fantastic, because I do not have the ability to sit in this chair that I had to move to because of Zoom and a wife downstairs vacuuming to do that right now.
I am happy momentarily to drop that also in the chat box. I've dropped a few things, and so has Tori. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention on a hyper-local level to folks who live, work, or serve in Hartford, that the Hartford Coalition also has a new website. And this website has a host of information and links out to resources and tools that are developed and used by our partners on the local and state level. And also in terms of this conversation around where do people go to get candidate information on the local level, because we know it's really challenging for municipal elections and even sometimes in state elections. The Hartford Votes website, through a partnership with an organization called NCIV and also Ballotpedia, is actually piloting a video project, and we are launching very soon with video responses from candidates for state representative or state senator seats for folks who are running in districts in Hartford. And so I will again, I'll include that link, but it is exciting on the municipal level, at least, that we have this resource where folks can go and actually watch candidates answer specific questions, and folks have the opportunity to pose questions, to submit questions that we will then ask candidates to respond to on video. So again, in COVID-19 times, we're being as nimble as we can be. And this is something we would love to see really expand across other municipalities in the state.
Thank you, Angela. Yes, and the Hartford Votes Us Coalition is really wonderful. And I would love, I'm not sure how it can happen, but I would love to see more municipalities picking up work like that at the local level. It's so important to make sure that that information is available in your community. So we're closely approaching time, but I do have one other question. And if we have time, I can speak in another one for all of us to respond to. But I would really love to hear from all of our panelists, since a lot of you have done work with service providers in your communities or across the nation. What are some innovative ways that you've seen service providers engage their clients in this civic process, registering to vote, actually going out to vote, and learning more about the candidates in their communities. I'd love to hear some examples.
I can kick it off if you want me to, Danielle. I can say, I look at organizations like New Reach, and they're running a 2020 voter registration campaign. And they really started it early. They're doing it thoughtfully. And it's, that's an inspiration. It really is about thinking through a process. We're talking about absentee ballots today and voter registration, but there is a way to sort of make this a part of your day-to-day with clients that you work with. To have this be something where, are you registered to vote is a conversation you're having when you're sitting with someone and you're doing an intake. It's a conversation we should be having. It's not always happening, but being institutionalized within your agency is a way that we know both across the nation, but also locally, can really impact voter engagement and registration. Having voting materials readily around and in your physical space is also really important. And one thing, I think of Jared Bruce's, he works at St. Vincent de Paul in Waterbury. One thing that he has shared that's really important is having things that are hand cards. So, having things that people can physically take with them. That's why we created the flyer where you can just sort of have people use their cell phones. One question that I had early on was, I had questions about having printed materials during COVID, but also, will a lot of people that you're working with, I said to Jared, will they have their cell phones, and is this something you think they do? Which is going and using their phone to register to vote. And, and he has found that people will do that. And we have had conversations across the state where people feel that, that makes it much more accessible. So thinking through different strategies to encourage this voter registration is really important. And then just, having some of the basics. And again, that voter fact sheet from the Secretary of State's office, print it out, hang it on your wall. And that's something that can just be an easy resource for people to read and review and look at it a million times, because that's what I've done.
I will say, so we are engaged, we have partners all across the US. Preble Street is a service provider in Maine. They have a Homeless Voices for Justice advocacy campaign, which is run by people with lived experience, and they've actually registered 2,500 people experiencing homelessness, which is amazing this year. And they do a lot of other advocacy initiatives. So they're just wonderful and a really good example of, what folks can do if they mobilize. And then I've been hearing from some folks, a tenants group in Boston. They have food drives, so they're connecting registration efforts and voting efforts with their food drives. And so like having all the information people need to submit mail-in ballots right there when they're giving out food to people. And then there's also some folks in New York that are in Massachusetts that are sitting down with people, setting up like a little table, and when they do, like the resident services folks, resident services coordinators are meeting one-on-one with people and walking them through like how to apply for a mail-in ballot, and then they're walking them through, okay, here's what you need to know, like in order to submit your mail-in ballot. So those are some of the things that I've seen so far, and people and efforts that people are doing to engage folks and make sure that they're registered to vote and submitting their applications in the appropriate time. So.
And I will just chime in to say that I have seen many of the same or similar initiatives that have been really fruitful locally, regionally, and nationally from some of our partners. I just want to reiterate something Sarah said that we always share, which is anytime we can embed voter registration and assisting folks in making a plan to vote into points of contact we already have, one-on-one or in small groups or in organizational communications. We truly believe that this is the easiest and often the most effective way to encourage folks to register. The second piece of this around making a plan to vote and a contingency plan even is something that at the Humphreys Institute in our partnerships and specifically with our new Yukon Hartford Voting Power Corps, we are doing a lot of work with. And this is a conversation that I think in 2020 is particularly important, but is something probably we should have been using more language around all along. And so Nonprofit Vote, which Tori mentioned earlier, has been really on it on social media and with their email blasts around encouraging folks to make sure they're vote ready. And that's something that on the individual and organizational level, we can be doing as well. I have seen and heard about some other creative uses of social media through short film video contests like Everyday Democracy's Joy of Video contest that's happening now, because those videos, and this is focused on young people, there's a 14 to 17-year-old category and an 18 to 25-year-old category, which we know is really, really important when we look at voter turnout data. But it's an invaluable resource in terms of not only the process of getting young folks to make these videos and really critically think about why voting matters, but also these videos become a really useful tool for some of the peer-to-peer conversations that we're having in all of our virtual realms these days, right? And then just one other thing that's a little bit different from what I've heard so far, we know of partners who are doing things like caravans through specific cities and towns to talk to folks, to use QR codes like our Vote ER QR codes that folks can get with Vote ER's inclusive Healthy Democracy Kit, which I'll throw that link if I have time in the chat box too, as an easy way to get folks to register, but also to mobilize folks. And I will just share one other tool now that I didn't think of before that's related to this caravan idea. It's about where we focus our efforts on registering folks to vote and helping folks make a plan to vote and helping really reduce the barriers to voting, right? CT Data Collaborative has developed some tools which are available on their website that use actual voter turnout data from the Secretary of State's office, not on the household level, but to show in neighborhoods, in census tracts, what voter turnout data looks like, with the capacity to break some of that down demographically, especially by age. And so these are tools that some of our partners and our Voting Power Corps are using also to make data-driven decisions around where we focus last minute efforts. And I think that's an important piece of this conversation too.
Thank you all, that was so helpful. I do want to squeak in one last question if we can. In the instance that you or a client that you may be working with or a family member or a friend feels like you've experienced voter suppression or discrimination, what should you do? What is the first step you can take?
You can contact the ACLU of Connecticut. You can call a national hotline, 1-866-R-VOTE. There are a couple of other national hotlines available as well, which we can drop either in the chat box or provide in follow-up materials. For instance, on the day of election, this 1-866-R-VOTE hotline, which we'll be running, gives folks the opportunity, if you face a barrier, a level of discrimination or suppression at the polls, folks will be staffing this hotline around the clock so that people can call and get answers and file reports that way. But the ACLU Connecticut and this national hotline are the first idea bring to mind. Also in Connecticut, Common Cause Connecticut is offering a roving poll monitor program. There's actually a training tonight at 6 p.m. for folks who have the capacity to do this, but there will be people out at the polls, even if they're not out at the polls in the traditional sense. Again, as folks make decisions around what feels safest during the pandemic, but there will also be people at the polling locations as volunteer poll monitors. And first and foremost, on election day, right? I know you're not only talking about election day, Danielle, but on election day, poll workers and the election judge, the person who has been designated the lead in the lead role at a given polling location, should also receive a report if somebody feels that their vote has been interfered with, or they have been harassed, or any sort of voter suppression tactic. So those are a few ideas just off the top of my head. I'm sure Sarah and Tori may have some additional ideas.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention the hotline number, so that's great you mentioned that, Angela. And yeah, I know you can volunteer as a poll watcher and make sure that people's rights are being respected, as like if you want to do something. Yeah, just kind of agree with everything that Angela said. The ACLU is a wonderful resource, and they're really upping their game this year in terms of voter protections.
And I'm happy with all that's been said. It was quite a lot of great information. So thank you to both of you.
Oh, and I think also just knowing your rights. So like just being on top of that is important. You know, especially if someone's trying to give you like a provisional ballot and you're like, wait, I think I should be able to vote, you know, just I think being aware of your rights. And I know there's a lot of great sources of information out there about what they are. So
Which I just want to add to that, Tori, because sometimes we think that folks in positions of some sort of authority have more information or more accurate information. We have fantastic people who sign up to work as poll workers. However, this is a temporary position that folks get time limited training for. And so it's also really important to remember that poll workers and even the election judge may not always have or give out accurate information. And this is why contacting the ACLU nationally or the ACLU Connecticut and using this hotline, this a partner hotline of 866 our vote is also really important, because it does happen that sometimes we get misinformation or get turned away from a polling location, and it's really important that that gets reported as quickly as possible.
All right, thank you all. We only have 2 minutes left, and I know there was still a question in the chat, so if any of you want to try and respond to that really quickly, I want to make sure we get an answer in. But I did want to just share a few quick things before we wrap up. Dawn, if you could move to the next slide. We've mentioned the Connecticut League of Women Voters a ton in this presentation, but they do have some really great, quick, and digestible resources. I'll also plug, I have a mask from them that says vote, so just a fun little thing. But yes, check out the League of Women Voters site. They've been doing a lot of great work in this space, especially around the absentee ballots, as it's been a very quick process that Connecticut's picked up and stood up for this election. So it's helpful to have these resources, and I just wanted to highlight that again. And Dawn, if you want to go to the next slide, these are just, we'll highlight again some of the important dates to keep in mind. There's only one slide left after this. It just says thank you. We can stay on this slide because I think it's a little bit more important. But this way you have this information and these dates. So know that it's happening quickly, and the election's just around the corner. So keep these dates in mind as you move through the next few weeks. But with that, I think we are pretty much ready to wrap it up. So thank you so much for all of our presenters. You are so passionate about this topic, and you're very I love your energy, and I'm feeling motivated to go learn some more after this and take some action after this. So thank you so much. I did just want to say before we close out, our IForums are designed to begin or continue conversations, but never to end them. We know voting is so important in our work in ending homelessness, not just for the November election, but always. And as I'm leaving today feeling motivated and ready to take some action, I hope you are all as well. And as we hit 12 p.m., just a reminder that the recording, the PowerPoint slides, and we'll work to follow up with some of these additional materials that we've highlighted today in the presentation for you. We'll work to make those available hopefully before the election, so that way you can review them and have these resources on hand for November 3rd, but also for all future elections. And with that, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, everyone.